the Chinese way. Me bowing to
All
you.
right,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Welcome. We're just here after service, pouring some tea, getting settled in. We got guys running behind the scenes, turning on lights, doing all the thing. But hopefully you're sitting there warm in your home, or there was quarantine hotels, there was homes. Stephen from Calgary became Stephen in Calgary as he landed during the middle of service. So congrats, but thanks for joining wherever you're joining from. I want to introduce you to a good friend of mine. This is Ricky.
Hey, you guys.
Ricky has been involved in Island for a long time.
12 years,
We
not that long.
lived in the same district for a long time.
That's right, the cool neighborhood.
And yeah, so she's joining us today. If you name something at the church, she's probably done it. The opening up, closing, mission work, everything. So you have a good history of
I've been
loving
around.
and serving the church.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining us. We have some dim sum today, as always, festive.
I know, with the lights. Got fancy, guys, ribbons.
This was great. I saw the glow in the back even during worship when it was dark. You could see the dim sum glow. It was pretty great. All right, so what's your favorite out of these three, Ricky?
None of them, but I guess this is really for the Guaylo, if you're real local
See,
Canto.
What you're going to love about Ricky on Dim Sum is she's honest.
I am a little too honest. Yeah, I'll take that. Thanks for
give
the
you a little of
siomai.
everything.
I'll have some tea first.
And we have Pastor Rick joining us in a minute as he comes down, so it'll be great.
Oh, he's already
my
here.
goodness.
Whoa, spoke too soon. Here.
I was like Jesus after the resurrection, just appearing in rooms. You did. Oh, man.
Right.
Oh, well, hey, welcome. So glad to have you. We were just introducing Ricky and our festive dim sum.
Okay.
Get some tea. You've been talking for a while.
Food.
Yeah, and some food.
Yeah, there you go.
Help me, but I gotta have the hot sauce.
Okay.
Yeah. So I had this revelation a few minutes before we came on. Rick, you were talking about names, and I think it was
Ruth.
well, yeah, Naomi, and then her name, and then Ruth, and
Meaning.
talking about your sister, middle name Ruth, and then so I was asking Ricky, I was like, hey, what is that? That's interesting. Like, what does your name mean? And she's like, I don't know. You're saying you just chose it because you liked it, right? Not
like most
from the
Chinese,
meaning.
if you're local Chinese at
sometimes
school, you know, you have to pick your own English name because my parents didn't give me one. So I picked Ricky simply because I was told Ricky with the Y is a boy's name, so Ricky with the I.
That's good.
I had no idea what it means. Then.
Okay. So if you're, give us your name in the chat with your meaning if you know it.
Really?
And whether you've lived up to that or not, because this gets interesting. So we just Googled it real quick. Well, what does Ricky mean? And thanks to The Bump, a site I frequent often, not really, its meaning means forever or alone, but not forever alone. I think alone and like set apart. It says, as a girl's name is related to the Old Norse name Erica. How about that? The old German name Frederica, the name Rika, and the American name Rochelle, and the name Ricky, forever alone. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. And so she's like, well, what does yours mean? I think it means, Eric means ruler. And so I looked it up. It means forever or alone and a ruler. And I was like, well, we have the same root to our name. We didn't even put it together.
How cool is that?
Then we thought Rick is coming on board.
What does his name
And
mean?
he is coming. So we realized we're all related in a way that we're all, I guess, bring our own sense of power, which can make us feel alone.
It's also a stack of corn, I think, or something like that, or hay or something.
Hey,
I don't
think it's
know.
like
A Rick
Stack
is
of hay. A rick
hay.
is a stack of hay. Also,
I'm a farmer. I should know that.
Hey, but can I tell you guys my fun? And you mentioned that you have to have an English name.
Yeah.
So I'm in a restaurant, and this waiter comes over, and his name is Sin. And I'm thinking, well, it must have some meaning in Chinese. So I ask him, what does it mean?
Maybe he's really into
So he goes, I'll be back. He goes away and talks to him. He comes back and says, it means criminal. And I'm thinking, well, that didn't go well. So I don't know why he chose that. But sometimes our names, we don't really know what they mean. They just sound a certain way, I think. But it's nice to look at the history. It really is. And and the biblical account's very clear about the importance of that.
For sure.
We have all these names of God that we've had a series on that once, I think.
Yep.
They're great to understand our character.
Yeah.
So I hope if you have a good name, send it in so we can celebrate with you.
Hey, and I'm now a fan of The Bump. Here's what The Bump says about Eric. Some names just breathe power, and this name is no exception. Coming from the Norse name, I don't know how to say it. This name means sole ruler. Baby is already the rule of your life, but this name will have them climbing to the top in every aspect.
Oh, I'll remember that.
There
Eric.
we go. I'll send you my donation, bump.com. I appreciate you. Okay, hey, we're going to dive into what was a great character and story, just synopsis and look at Ruth.
Yeah.
There's so much depth.
Yeah.
And
Fascinating person.
Yeah, and I think character is the right word. When we talk about the character of Ruth, to see who she was
Yeah.
in her circumstances
Yeah.
doing this, she was faithful and loyal
Amazing,
and determined. And so in kind of preparing and reading about Ruth, what was something that kind of stood out to you or your understanding deepened or you're like, oh, I didn't realize that about the story?
Well, I think the main, and I covered it with this loyal determination, but that whole area, the richness of her being brave and courageous. There's a lot of literature about how that at that time, even in the translations, they'll use one word to determine women and another word men. But men are also courageous, strong, and fighters. Yeah. But women, it was a different translation. But I think it's there. That's why some of the newer books and things that I referred to are mentioning that that's women also. And so we've missed some things. I noticed that all the newest books written about Ruth now are all by women who are going through and re-looking at some of this stuff. And it's really fascinating. But I think that whole area of the courageous aspect and how she was countercultural.
Yeah.
That was big. The other, I didn't even mention it in this because there's too much.
This is bonus.
But
it's free.
Bonus is the whole character of Boaz as a guardian redeemer and what that means in making alignment with Christ, who is his. So there's all kinds of richness to the story as a whole, but more related to Boaz and that whole story. So I kind of stayed away from that. Yeah. But that was also really fascinating.
Yeah, there's even more depth there.
Yeah, there's so much there in that small book and then the other thing I mentioned that the actual story is someone came to my office while I was talking about Ruth, and they said, "Well, do you know that Ruth for the Hebrew Scriptures is after Proverbs?" And I said, "No, that's not right. That can't be. I would have heard that."
Yeah.
And so they left the office. I'm looking online to find out. Oh my gosh, it's true. So I had to go to their office and find this staffer and say, "You were right."
Yeah.
How did you? And they told me their son. But that's just so good, that whole stuff.
So rich.
About the richness of what we have. So there are all kinds of little things like that.
Yeah. So if you haven't read Proverbs, the end of it, Proverbs 31.
Yeah, it's a great read it.
And then read it in light of Ruth coming next and what we learn about her.
And I mentioned the part about the city gate. But it's amazing thematically how they work together.
That's really great.
Yeah, it's really, really good stuff.
I
don't think I've ever done this much preparation for a sermon, ever.
Really?
Because I just got entrenched with Ruth.
Yeah. That means Jane must have got 3 or 4 sermons worth then, huh? As you talked about.
So you want me to tell you this about the message I prepared and the one I gave today?
Sure. You've got the mic.
This is true, but so I had this. I was working on all this stuff. Yeah. And I came up. I like paradox, so I had 4 paradoxes of Ruth's life, and she was this and this. Yeah. And I had them all, and I had some of the same stuff woven into that story, and I thought it was pretty good. So at the end of it, Jane said to me, she goes, "Oh, that's really good. So can you tell me in one sentence what your message is about?" I said, "Well, no, I think I'd have to make a chart." And I started thinking, maybe make a chart at the end. And then I started thinking about it, and then I said, I think I need to rewrite this. I think I had more of an academic. So Jane's question about one made me relook at it. This was at 11 o'clock at night. I went to bed at 2 o'clock, just Xing out and finding.
Last night?
No. Okay. This was last week. I thought I'd be done a week early, but I had to rework the whole thing. That's when I came with the idea of the tapestry and the things. But first, it was more like an academic kind of address and this stuff. It just didn't fit it was good study, but I just love my wife, and she said, "Tell me one word," and I said, "I can't do that." So I trashed that. It's in my files somewhere for maybe using.
Good job, Jane. We all thank you. We all thank you for the message.
So if it was good, give credit to my wife. So.
All right, so we've had some. Caleb, want to give a shout out to you, buddy. You're always joining. I appreciate you. Kevin, you're a pastor, but do you always tell the truth? Kevin equals handsome. I'll look that up on thebump.com later and find out what that means. Appreciate you guys, especially joining from quarantine. I know as Ricky and I experienced the message together and was kind of taking in, something that stood out to us was just taking the time to call out hard realities and what she faced and Ricky, you were saying like that really stood out to you. And
Yeah,
caught you.
so I think when I was listening to your sermon, you mentioned about naming your pain.
Yeah.
I thought that was really important. I mean, really appreciate this message. Somehow you spoke primarily to women.
I felt I should, kind of.
Yeah, and
But I didn't want to.
I felt it like it was for me. Is that what's that? Okay, go ahead.
No,
Sarah.
so I think personal reflection, without taking too much time, but I thought thinking about hardship, realizing I didn't really have much hardship in my life, but the person, as you were sharing, speaking about, I thought of my grandmother. She's not yet a believer yet, and she had it rough. And especially when you were thanking or remembering widows, who, my grandmother is a widow for 40, if not 50 years. And I think for her, without having God in her life, she tries really hard to mask her bitterness or anger. And I think it's one thing that kind of pass on from generation to generation. I see my mom does that. I used to do that too. I relied so much on my own, trying to be positive. But it didn't work until I found Jesus. And it's just so different. And I think it just gives me a lot of hope. Praying, God, you did that for Ruth, for Naomi. I'm praying that for women who are struggling, whether they know you or not, they will find comfort in knowing that God is there. It's okay to say you're angry. It's okay to say I am not okay. I think this is even for Christian. I was telling Eric,
totally.
ever since becoming a Christian sometimes, and maybe especially for those of us who work in the church, you almost feel like you ought to be okay. If someone asks you, and then sometimes, of course, their situation, depending on the context, you don't always want to just dish out all your dirty laundries and cry over every circumstance. But I think it's okay. It's needed to be vulnerable and honest with God. Like, I am upset at you, God. Why did you allow this to happen? And it's okay. And I was telling Eric, I think in Naomi's story, actually, she was in that state where she was upset at God for quite a bit. Quite a bit. And so I think it's, especially Christmas, everyone thinks that you ought to be jolly, happy. But your message is really, I hope, gives people the permission to reflect and be like, well, I'm not, but what can I do about it? And don't just sit in their bitterness.
Well, I think, I could have said, that could have been a whole message, really. But I'm glad you got that from it.
Message.
I'm glad you got that. But what I was going to say is that I mentioned the Lamentations. But we often forget as believers, and COVID has done, we've lost so much stuff. But to lament it and to name it, and Naomi's just a kind of extreme example, but that principle I hope people will use, because it does help you then engage in other ways.
I was going to ask, so what does that unlock or do for us?
I think it just
we're
helps
feeling it, but when we name it.
Well, God is this great believer in us, and he's a great believer in truth. So anytime you can speak the truth with the right kind of character, but say, I'm just telling you the truth. That's what I love about things, like I mentioned, Alpha. People that can say, I just don't believe this stuff, but I'm willing to explore it. Or I just can't experience Christmas because of this. And I do think widows and things, Christmas is a tough time. So you acknowledge it. It frees you up to speak the truth. And in safe settings, it can be really liberating.
That's right. I think free is such a good word for that, when you can name it and put it here.
Just,
and then look at it from here.
And look at it,
That's really good.
Glad you got that out of there. So,
Well, and I appreciate your blessing at the end of that for all. I mean, you mentioned like widows and foreigners, but for all those suffering, that may Emmanuel be with you this season. I thought that was a great blessing.
Hope that's true.
And I
that
love
was the two things. The message and at the end I said, "Do I dare speak directly to women as a man?" I feel like I should.
I dare not, but good on you.
Today I could probably just claim I was a different gender and just tell you. It's a messy world out there these days with some of this, but I wanted to speak to women at the end.
So speaking of blessing that you gave, at the end of Ruth is this great blessing after their marriage and to Naomi. And
it's great there, You're gonna read
and it says, the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord who's not left you this day without a redeemer. May his name be renowned in all of Israel. He shall be to you for all this. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him."
Isn't that great?
And to be, for Ruth to be a certain way, and then Naomi to recognize that and we're all biased towards our own family usually.
Sure.
But then for others around
Yes.
to say, I see she is worth more to you than 7 sons.
Isn't that amazing?
And in that day, it's not 1 for 1, 1 son and 1 daughter. So to say more than 7, it was amazing to see kind of the community around recognize the value of Ruth.
And in our culture, we don't have any idea what it's like in those days for women.
Yeah.
It was really pretty brutal.
Yeah. So
It's tough in today's world, but it was really bad then.
Yeah.
So it has so much meaning when she says that.
Yeah. And we don't deny the hard realities you talked about. Not everything's a Disney ending, but here to see that Ruth and Naomi were lifted up by God
Yes.
and honored and he was
Amazing,
faithful was
amazing
pretty great.
story,
That's awesome. Well, I want to share one thing to end, which is kind of a resource, but anything else you want to mention from today? I mean,
Just for fun.
Oh, okay.
You asked but to me, I had to start reading. I mean, I included in my story and said a little bit, but the thing about the sandal and taking off a sandal and giving it to someone as the official way to transfer ownership.
Yeah.
I just thought, we've changed a lot, but I just love those little details in the books and the Bible. And so I just think, I would say, though, if you've got time, read the book of Ruth. Just sit down and read it and kind of notice the things like you read something there that sticks out to you.
Yeah.
It's a really, really solid book that I just think today it got lifted up. So I would just say, take some time and read it and treasure it because it's a great one. That's it.
And it's readable, right?
It's
Four
very
chapters.
readable. Much more readable than some other things in the Bible. So.
Yeah. Oh, you can't say that as a pastor.
So.
Ricky, any other parting words or things you're...
Well, maybe another quick comment. So other than you talked about naming your pain, I think another thing that stood out to me in the story of Ruth is how, kind of go back to what Brett shared last week.
Yeah.
Faith is salvation plus work.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
I think I mentioned that briefly, but yes, great.
yeah, that was something that comes to my mind thinking of that. I also thought of like Ruth. She believed. She also took action. Which is what you said. I think in the same context, like it's pretty remarkable as a Gentile. I wish there was more written about why Ruth made that decision when Naomi says, "Why don't you go home with your sister? Two of you. I'm going to go back to my country."
Yeah.
What made her wanted to go with her mother-in-law?
Yeah.
But at that time, she wouldn't have seen any blessing. She didn't believe in God because God blessed her. Yeah. But she chose to put her faith in it. So that was another thing that.
So I said it, but I believe it's that little phrase at the end of her quote.
Which is?
Your God be my God. I think she knew I'm missing out if I separate.
Which is great.
I believe that we don't talk about that. It's more the family side of the. But I think as you read through it, it's the family side. But I think that's what made her determined.
But that also kind of, again, I'm reminded Rebecca was the same.
Yes.
She somehow, all the other people in Jericho heard of how great the Israelites' God is. They didn't want to believe, but she was the one, I want to put my faith in this God, even though it hasn't benefited me yet.
So that's very
So it's
direct
pretty
about it. I think
amazing.
Ruth's a little more subtle in there, but I think they're parallel.
Yeah, and that's the style of Ruth, is the subtle.
Yeah.
And I think, so the thing I want to end on is just maybe a resource. There's a 7-minute video on the Bible Project. If you want to recapture Ruth, be reminded. It walks through the book beautifully, and then they'll give you this great chart
it's so
of what
good.
they go through. It's so good.
It's so good.
But one of the lines they end with, as you check their resources that I really love, which is our series, A Woven Story, it says this is a big message in a short story. It shows how God is constructing his grand story out of the small, seemingly inconsequential stories of everyday people.
Yep.
So all the characters face life's normal challenges: death, moving, lack of financial resources, familiar responsibilities, and find God is weaving a story of redemption out of all the details. The book of Ruth encourages us to view our day-to-day lives as part of God's bigger plan, which is what we've been looking at and is what our calling is in this series, is continue to find that divine thread that goes through your work schedule and your family and your emotions and where God has brought you in your life. And so thank you, Pastor Rick, for opening God's Word for us. Thank you, Ricky, for joining us and sharing your insights and friendship. I know you would iterate the same, that wherever I go, you would go. Wherever I die, you would die. You're that close a friend, so I appreciate that. So, church, we love you. We'll see you back next week for online service and dim summary.
Take
care.
care. Bye-bye.